I started to really get interested in all the time that schools spend on campus master planning. And I started to wonder, why don't we spend as much time on pedagogical master planning? So when you think about laying out a campus master plan, and you think about the topography of the campus and hydrology, I started to realize, well, what about that same way of thinking about a pedagogical ecosystem? So can we map out the professional learning, the curricula, the learning environment, the instruction, etc.?
So it's less about the physical space and more about the people that are gathered together to learn with one another. Where this work really became in earnest at Mount Vernon in Atlanta is by us studying the global achievement gap. Tony Wagner's book about probably 7 or 8 years ago now. Did a full book study with the faculty and parents, and loved this quote: in education we talk about all kinds of things, theories of learning, classroom techniques, and so on. But we never actually look at and talk about teaching together. And if we want to improve instruction, the first thing we need to do is to make the classroom walls transparent. We have to do learning walks together and talk about what we see. We need to talk about the elements of good practice and then strategies for helping everyone in the system improve every year.
So we're going to try and do 4 things. We're talking about some intro stuff right now. We're going to let you guys do some intro stuff, get a sense of who's in the room. We're going to simulate part of what this is about. You'll get to watch a young teacher in action and critique him. And then we're going to try in 10 minutes each to tell you what this looks like at 2 different schools. And that way you have a chance to compare and contrast about it.
So let me tell you a little bit more about Mount Vernon just as a way of introduction. I know it might be hard to see from the back where Fiona is, but Fiona, you're familiar with this diagram. This is Mount Vernon in a 1-page snapshot, essentially. So our mission starts for a school of inquiry, innovation, and impact. Grounded in Christian values, we prepare all students to be college-ready, globally competitive, and engaged citizen leaders. To be honest with you, it's the first school where I've worked at or consulted, so I've worked at about 5 schools. I've consulted at over 300 schools, roughly. And it's the first school I've ever been to where students, faculty, parents can actually say the mission statement. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to live and breathe the mission statement. And if you think about that's the purpose of our school, our culture is defined by norms. And these norms were to start with questions, fail up, share well, assume the best, and have fun. And if Brett Jacobson were here, he would tell you, he's our head of school, he would tell you that this is really the secret sauce of the school. So when you think about being a school of inquiry and innovation and impact, and having a norm of starting with questions, going on learning walks is a very natural thing. It doesn't take a lot to explain it to incoming faculty or existing faculty. That's of course would be a practice for us, is to be a student of our own school, to really know what's going on in our schools so we can innovate and improve practice. And then we have these design principles. So for instance, learning demands interactive and flexible spaces. So when we get into the actual simulation, you'll see that that's part of what we look for, is those spaces being interactive and flexible. And then we can correlate that to the type of instructional methodology being used. And then we can gear our professional learning towards improving those practices. And then finally, the results that we're looking for are these, some people call them portraits of a graduate. They're our Mount Vernon mind. So we are trying to enhance all learners, that could be faculty and students, all learners' ability to be innovators, communicators, collaborators, ethical decision makers, solution seekers, and creative thinkers. And then one of the things that's unique about us is that we also have an R&D lab. So as a school of inquiry, innovation, and impact, you can imagine that when you start to get serious about innovation, you look at other industries and other companies and try to find out like what makes an industry innovative. One common denominator is that they all have R&D labs. So in 2010, we started our own R&D lab. It's called MVI5, the Mount Vernon Institute for Innovation. I'm the executive director of that institute, and we do 4 main things. We share thought and action leadership, happening at Mount Vernon, our own place, and other schools and organizations. We host dynamic learning events. So for instance, last week we had a school visit day for 60 visitors, 10 different states, 14 different schools came and spent the morning with us about this topic, how to do learning walks and instructional rounds. And we the next day did a flash lab, which is a 3-hour quick tour through design thinking and major design and engineering work. We also design programs and products, so we have a number of design thinking products. We also design programs like the Innovation Diploma at Mount Vernon. That we have 16, 17, 18-year-olds running a design consultancy, and their clients include Porsche North America, AT&T, Foundry, Chick-fil-A, etc. That was not my experience as a 16-year-old. And then we consult with other schools and organizations around the city, around the country, even have some international partners as well.
And again, I'm Derek Willard. I'm the Assistant Head of School for Academic Affairs at Providence State School in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're a TK through 12 non-sectarian school, 1,660 kids. We too have a version like, in some ways a lot like what Mount Vernon does, but you know, our own thing. So at PDS, our mission is to inspire a passion for learning, a commitment to personal integrity, and a sense of social responsibility. And over the last 10 years in particular, that sense of social responsibility, kind of defining that, has played out as trying to graduate global citizens. We'd love to graduate empathetic problem solvers who are going to change the world. And in some ways, it sounds kind of like what you're doing too. And so to do that, we've developed this one-pager. What does that journey look like? We have something called the PD Passport. You'll see that later in the presentation. But we're talking about the knowledge, skills, and character dispositions to produce this graduate. So this is our portrait of a graduate in a really, really simple snapshot. And like Bo said, I think successful organizations have an R&D unit. About 3 years ago, we started one. We just call it the Center. It really is CASTLE, the Center for the Art and Science of Teaching, Learning, and Entrepreneurship. We have a team of 3. Tim Fish, if you were here yesterday, talked about the second ring. And so I would say, to stick with the hiking metaphor, these guys are our Sherpas. And they really help people within the organization, particularly our faculty, take risks. And so they've helped us with some of the work you're going to see today. So what we'd love to do right now is just have you guys introduce yourselves to each other. Not the whole room, but the folks at the table. Some of you may already know each other. But just say who you are, what school you're from, why you came to this presentation. In particular, that's what we're interested in. Bo and I are going to circulate a little bit, but we're going to take no more than maybe 4 minutes, 5 minutes to do that. All right? So please, introduce yourselves.
A little bit of how we enter into this learning walk and instructional round process at Mount Vernon and at Providence Day is we really believe that it's about coaching each other. So this is Alex Ronald. On the top of a mountain. So if you know Alex, he's considered the #1 rock climber in the world right now. You may have seen him on a morning like Today show. He just, about a year and a half ago, free soloed the nose of El Capitan, which is 3,100 feet with no ropes. And that movie, Free Solo, is being played around the world right now. He has a coach, right? Michael Phelps has a coach. So even the people at the upper echelon of their craft, of their science, of their work, of their sport, of their instrument, they all have coaches. So we really believe that that's the spirit with which we enter this, is that it's not about evaluation. We do not use learning walks and instructional rounds at Mount Vernon for evaluation. It's not tied to compensation and salary. It's not tied to that sense of contractual improvement. It is tied to a growth mindset, right? So we try to make as many distinctions between the two. You can imagine there is, of course, some in the real world, there's some gray area, but we have found over time, so I've been working on this I think I first started to work on it in 2003, and it has become increasingly apparent and important to make those distinctions between things, especially when you're trying to get people to take risks and try new innovative teaching techniques. Like a student often will not take a risk when they're trying to earn that A, because if I know how to get the A, why would I take a risk? And the same is true for us adults, right? So we're actually going to put you in the driver's seat for a little bit and simulate a learning walk / instructional rounds. We decided to keep technology out of it, to just pull a variable out. So there are handouts around your table. And for those that are in the back rows, you're welcome to come join a table, or there are some more sheets up here. You can grab one off the table. But we're going to ask you to play the role of what you're doing is you are part of a team that's going on a learning walk or an instructional rounds. We're going to actually watch Willard teaching at PBS, and the video is about 12 minutes long. It's been spliced from several different moments in the classroom moment. We might not go through the whole thing, but just to orient you to this form a little bit, this is based off of Mount Vernon's actual instructional rounds form, which you can find the entire thing online, and then that is referenced on this other sheet that's at your table. So mvi5.org/rounds will get you the entire instrument that we use, that we developed. But it's just a timestamp of when, who you're observing, and then narrative notes. And I have a background in ethnography and anthropology, and so it's primarily writing down things that you see and hear, not so much drawing conclusions or judgments. And then on the back side, it's a little bit about seating configuration and instructional mode and methodology, and then a little bit of your perception of like what kind of role or mode are the students in, and what degree of engagement level do you see overall. So it gives you a little bit of a chance to play and feel what it's like, and then we're going to simulate a debrief after that.
Today, we're gonna wind up learning about the second battle of Bull Run, but en route, what I love to do is teach you a little bit about strategy and tactics. So we're gonna do 4 chunks, and they're probably no more than 10 minutes each, so think about that, right? If we want to get out of here on time, when I turn you loose on an activity that requires cooperation, you gotta move with a purpose. So at some point, we've got to open that bag. You guys see the bag of goodies? You don't have to dump it just yet, but when we do it, I'm probably going to put you on a timer, and we're going to move with a purpose. Everybody got it? Fish? Okay, all right, here we go. So let's start activity number 1. We're going to try and define strategy and tactics. Everybody on page 6?
Yep. Yes.
Sergeant Adams, I know you had to play catch up.
I'm about to be.
You're about to be. Outstanding. Okay, so in your packet, you got 3 different things there: grand strategy, and tactics. Let's focus on strategy and tactics. Thomas, what does it say for strategy? What does that mean to you?
Like trying to get people to believe in you.
Okay, that's one use of that word. Hudson, what does it say for tactics?
Battle or skirmish.
Okay, so taking those 2 things together, what is a campaign? Could be a series of battles, right? Versus someone trying to convince someone you want them to elect you, right? So there's the way the definition is written in your packet right now. There's a notion of one battle, right, versus many battles. Okay, let's think about it. Let's think about it a different way, or add to that definition. Let's think about a where. Where would a campaign occur? Some of y'all did projects in the last week. Where's a campaign?
Maybe like a specific region.
Okay, did anybody, did
Like
one
the
of these
peninsula?
groups, what?
Peninsula.
The Peninsula campaign. Somebody give me
I
another
didn't do it.
campaign they worked on. What? The war in the West might have been a series of campaigns.
Maybe
Fair enough.
Shenandoah Valley.
Shenandoah Valley, Jackson's campaign in the Valley, right? What were the length of some of those things? Days. Peninsula was 5 months. You got me? We added to our definition,
Yes.
right? Versus a battle. Where? So we've added a where and a when to campaign. Right, Travis? Give me a little. Okay. All right. So where would a battle be?
Battles is a one-time thing.
It seems to be a one-time thing, but if we had battles with multiple days?
Yeah.
Give me one. Y'all did a presentation?
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg, we haven't done that yet, but who did a battle in a presentation that took several days? Anybody? Shiloh, how long did Shiloh take? Do you remember? At least 2 days.
Capture New Orleans took a while.
Captured New Orleans took a while, right? Yeah. When those guys started up the river, they were 70 miles away. They had to fight through some stuff. They got there, and then Beast Butler was the beast. Okay, you got it? So a battle might take place. I thought I was going to get the obvious answer. A battle would take place on a battlefield, but how do we know what a battlefield is, right? But it's probably a local area in the Civil War times. Think about defining a battlefield in terms of something you could do with your senses. This might be as far as you could see. What would let you see better? Telescope, higher ground,
Not being in a telescope.
not being in a wooded area. Right, you guys with me? Okay. How do you think that compares to a battlefield today? What's probably a big difference in battlefielding today? What type of technology changes that? Drones, or anything that could move in the air. Yeah, right, move, fly in the air, right? Okay, so I want you to think through all of that as we think about a battlefield today. So one way to think about this, as we do these activities today, because we're going to go back and forth between strategy and tactics, is to think about being on the balcony versus the dance floor. Right? Do they still, we don't do dances in the,
Sometimes.
over here, we
Yeah.
still do them? Right? But if you were looking for somebody to dance with, where is it easier to find them?
Dance floor.
It is? If the entire student body is in good answer. Right? So you guys with me? Okay, so a lot of the things we've seen over just a couple of weeks, we hear in the video strategy or tactics, strategy, tactics, strategy, tactics, but there's a difference there. Let's go back to our units for just a second. Remember when we did unit sizes?
Yes.
I wonder who's probably more doing strategy on that chart. And if you don't remember, I know the chart is actually in one of these pages. You think generals. What's a general commanding? The lowest general. Brigadier. That was one of those words you had in trouble with. You got it?
That's why I remember that.
How many men? Look on the chart. How many men a brigadier general have? You ask him, you're telling me, sweetheart.
I was guessing.
I know.
Division like 6,000.
6,000.
2 or more battalions.
2 or more battalions. Yeah, you know, I will tell you, you know, probably generals and corps guys are thinking more strategy. Somewhere though, we see generals on the battlefield, right? General Jackson, General Longstreet, General, right? So at some point, strategy and tactics blur. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right? Okay, great. Any questions about defining strategy and tactics? Okay, great. Switching gears. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some terrain analysis. Highlighters or pencil or something, that's fine. I've got some highlighters in the bag too. But we're going to do 2 activities. So when I was in the U.S. Army, part of what we had to learn to do was analyze terrain. And unless you were walking that terrain, you have to do it on a map. Okay? So we're going to do it from a strategic point of view first. So every single one of you, you're going to do this alone this time out. You have this map on your packet, but I'm going to give you another one. The title on this map says the Civil War Area of Operations, but by and large, it's probably focused on what we might call the Eastern Theater. Now we can see the West too, but we can't see all the way to the West you were talking about. How far west did some of the battles go? New Mexico and, right? We've got some of the Mississippi on here, but didn't you talk about Texas?
Oh, yeah.
A battle in Texas, that kind of, you guys with me? Okay, so here's what I want you to do on your own. I want you to first highlight the border states in one color. It can be shaded with a pencil. You can outline it with a pen you have. You can grab a highlighter out of the bag. You can dump the bag. If you do not know the border states, where are they written?
In the packet.
They're in your packet. Where? the bottom of page 6. I guess you could. You give me the list out? Don't be afraid to use a highlighter. It's okay. Or a pencil. You can shade it with a pencil. There you go, Mac. Make them stand out. Okay. Make them stand out. This is a highly sophisticated coloring activity. I want to give you 90 seconds to do it.
Was Tennessee considered?
Hudson, where are the border states listed? All right, you have 90 seconds. 90 seconds to get the borders. Okay. Now, as you finish that, look up at the smartboard. Here's your instructions. Again, by yourself, consider what could be strategic features on your map for a president or the general in command of all forces. It doesn't matter which side.
All right, so we're going to move on. And what would happen if this were real, not a simulation, at Mount Vernon, is about 24 to 48 hours would pass. You would have completed these notes and this document online. We use SurveyMonkey as our tool just to make it simple. He wants us to go back to this. Okay. That's all right. Thank you, sir. We use SurveyMonkey, and whoever is the lead on that particular rounds processes the notes and sends the instructional rounds notes to the network of people that were involved in that rounds. So in that 24 to 48 hour period, all of the people in the network review the notes. So in our way of practicing this, you can imagine that there are about 3 to 6 people in Derek's classroom observing Derek's instruction at one time. It's kind of like why there are multiple mirrors on a bus, is so that you can see all the different angles, right? A car has fewer mirrors because it's a simpler vehicle. Teaching and learning is a very complex task, so you need multiple mirrors like on a bus. So we have multiple people in the room. They review the notes. I'm going to play the role of alpha facilitator. So we actually try to teach people how you facilitate a debrief. But the ideal is for the observed person, Derek, to really drive the debrief. So he's going through these notes, and he's doing highlighting and marginalia, and he's writing down things that he sees as trends or patterns in the ethnographic note-taking, and that's what's going to really drive what he asks the network in the debrief. So can we have like 2 or 3 people to bravely come join the simulated debrief with us? All right, so thanks to everybody for being here today. Derek, thanks for being open and transparent and vulnerable in your teaching. I know that can often be a challenging thing to let the door and the window wide open and let everybody in, but thanks for letting us be there.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Love to learn more about what you saw.
So maybe you'll start us and tell us, what were your desired outcomes for that class? What were you trying to accomplish? And not so much the run of the lesson plan, because we all saw that and you shared it with us ahead of time, but what were you really trying to get the students to learn and think about?
Sure, just a little background. I co-teach this class with another instructor, and was brought in for my military history background, having served in the Army, that kind of thing. And his style is a little more lecture-based, and the class can be a little passive sometimes. These are seniors mainly, mostly boys, and they're pretty content, I think, to kind of sit back and receive. And so one of my goals was to get these guys a little more engaged today, to have it be a more active session. And at least the portion you guys saw was the ramp up to that. So that it was actually I think we ended when you walked out with they were just doing something by themselves, then it went to a group of 2, then it went to a group of 4, and we moved from working on this strategic level to a more tactical level. I also spent so much time, it seemed like forever, but it was probably 8 minutes, trying to get clarity around 2 terms that we have been using for 6 weeks. whether it was in a Ken Burns PBS video clip or whether it was ourselves as co-instructors, I'm not sure we had a lot of clarity that the kids understood that. So was really trying to build out that definition beyond this notion of maybe the size or the place. And then the final piece, which again, I know y'all only got to see the start of class, was really, there was an analytical piece. I really wanted the kids to do some terrain analysis, which would happen on the eve of a battle, or the second night of a battle, or the third night. And I wanted kids to have a sense of, when they're looking at the little blocks, the red and blue blocks on a map, why those choices were made, why people were moving where they moved.
And then I know from, you've had time to review everybody's notes in the network, right? And a brief aside, obviously Derek has not had a chance to review their notes. So he's putting himself bravely on the spot. What type of questions, like what, can you share with us one big question that you had based on your team's feedback?
Sure. I think I'd be interested in some suggestions on how that might have started, that the ramp up might not have taken as long, that I got kids involved quicker. So I'm open to any suggestions about what you saw there and how that might move better, feel better. I'm wrestling with it.
Okay. So what do you think? You could even bring in starters that you've used in your own classes for a situation similar to this.
I really like the way that you define things really clearly for your students. I think that's very helpful. A lot of times we assume that they know when they don't know. I did notice that there was one student who did seem to give me a lot of feedback, so I know sometimes when I do the video in my class, I do like a pair share. I give them 2 minutes to 2 people, and they come up with an answer. So that would maybe been a possible way to start the lesson with, define strategy with partners. You have 2 minutes to give any definition. That works sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that, as you said, like the ramp up was effective. In other words, I watched the beginning, and you could even see people kind of leaning back physically in their seats. And it was primarily one person who was answering the questions, and you were bringing a lot more energy and engagement than your students were initially. But by the end of it, you had a lot of people participating, and so you achieved what you wanted. But I think in terms of having kids prepare to answer your questions before you start asking the questions would be a way to accelerate that process.
And I'll echo what the colleagues have said, that the transitions in the direction was so specific and very clear. The questioning insisting was it was supposed to evaluate how well the students knew, and so perhaps after that fair share of the wait time to call directly on the students might help to assess more formally what they're responding.
I like that. Seems like a good formative technique and to get everybody engaged quicker.
And we know from being in the network with you that your problem of practice that you've raised to the top is about advanced levels of student engagement. So I think particularly Amanda's suggestion about getting everybody to share with one another is a way. Later in the lesson, we know that they were all fully engaged in the mapping of those strategies and tactics and the strategic land forms, and their level of involvement changed considerably from that first mini lecture session.
What would it have looked like if you had actually had them map out the border states first?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But it might, again, I think that might have drawn everyone in more immediately. And
I don't know.
but that's
a
what
great
I'm
what
trying
if.
Yeah, it's a great what if. I'm trying to think through, how I might leverage that, and that's something I could go back and consider, when I do it for next year.
That's great. Scene. That was great. Thank you so much.
Round for our
So Derek and I are going to tell you about 10 minutes of kind of campfire stories about how this really works more in-depthly at our two schools. So again, I'm just showing you this. I know we've referenced it before, but I can't say enough how much our culture that we have intentionally built at Mount Vernon drives this practice of instructional rounds. Everything we do is in the service of the mission statement of we're a school of inquiry, innovation, and impact. And so when you're serious about being inquirers and innovators and people who make an impact, then the process of instructional rounds and learning walks is very natural, right? You want to be discoverers and explorers of your own practice and then share those things with one another. We know that from books like Innovator's DNA that it's very hard to teach someone how to innovate. Like if I were to ask any of you to come up here and act out in interpretive dance what innovation looks like, that's a very abstract construct, right? And if any of you had your blood pressure go up, I won't actually do that, although I do it in other workshops that I facilitate. But what you can do is learn how to observe better and how to experiment better and how to question better and how to associatively think better and how to network. And we know that those 5 things make a person and an organization more innovative: to observe, question, experiment, network, and associate. And so we use that in order to really deal with this question, this design challenge at Mount Vernon, is how might we innovate school to meet the needs of our world? And you could already start to hear it in here, right, when one of the network members posed a what-if question, right? So if you've read Ron Berger's work, A More Beautiful Question, one of the ways to start a very innovative question is with what if. So he was already spurring Derek, and Derek accepted it beautifully because he said, that's something I might try in framing my next class, is he is starting to think about what could I prototype, right, which is exactly what this is meant to drive. So let me go into a little bit more detail about the difference between learning walks and instructional rounds, because what you saw in a workshop that's 75 minutes long is a little bit of a hybrid of the two, and let me just give you some distinction between them. So I started to practice learning walks in 2003. I was at Westminster Schools in Atlanta for 17 years. I was the middle school principal for a decade there before I left and went to Unboundary and then to Mount Vernon. And we started to practice learning walks just in an effort to break down the walls between classrooms and get people into each other's classes. And we started with a positive, strength-based system with a very simple form for just to help with accountability. And the form basically said something like, list 5 things that you observed in the class. And then it gave a little bit of instruction about the difference between describing what you see and hear versus drawing a conclusion. Right? So for instance, a statement like all of the students were highly engaged is a conclusion. It's a judgment. So we would coach people over time to write down what they actually saw students doing and what they saw and heard students doing. At Mount Vernon, we have, and the form at Westminster had a final thing, and it just asked, what's something you might try in your own classroom because of your observation of a peer? And I'll tell you what happened over 7 years of introducing this. People started to invite each other into each other's classrooms to get feedback about something that they were trying new. Like, that's a huge win. When your faculty start to invite each other to say, hey, Susie, can you come and observe? I need feedback on trying something new. You know you've succeeded, right? Like, that's a lag indicator. The lead indicator is that they're actually going and doing the learning walks to meet the obligation of you have to do like 3 a semester. That's a lead indicator. A lag indicator is they're actually begging each other to come do more. So at Mount Vernon, we practice these by, a learning walk is basically a shallow walk into multiple learning environments. So everyone's expected to go at least once a semester. Nicole Martin, the Chief Integration Officer, and I, we take new faculty on these about 8 times a year to help develop their practice. And essentially what we do is we walk into about anywhere from 5 to 10 classrooms or learning spaces, so it could be outdoors. in about an hour. So you can figure about, 6-ish minutes at each stop. And what we do is we take a picture and we tweet the picture with our quick observation notes. So I'm 48 years old. My mother did not have a window into the school like that, right? She had to know from me recounting my day, which the older I got as a middle school and an upper school boy, became harder and harder for her to get details out of me, or she had to go and talk to the teacher. But imagine the culture that's been created over 10 years now, where someone can actually watch slices of time, self-reported and peer-reported, about what's going on in the school. From a peer standpoint, Derek is on a learning walk, and I can actually take a learning walk asynchronously. I can actually watch his tweets and piece together the various things that are happening in the school, and wonderful things happen. 4th grade teachers seek out 11th grade teachers and say, hey, did you know we're working on very similar things? Could we get our students together next week? Like, that's one of the byproducts of this. We don't get together to formally debrief a learning walk. It's really for the observer more than the observee. So the tweet is the only artifact or set of artifacts of that learning walk, and there's not a formal debrief. All right, contrast that with instructional rounds. In instructional rounds, there's a network of about 6 to 8 people who get together weekly to do observations with one another. That's the mirrors on the bus. So you have 6 to 8 people rotating who is doing the observing and who is being observed. So it is not at Mount Vernon a practice where administrators only are doing the observing and teachers are the only ones being observed. Let me underscore that. It is not a practice where only the administrators are doing the observing. That is a very different cultural dynamic to set up. But when your peers are observing you, and when people fill out instructional rounds forms like you did on my faculty meeting that I'm leading, the playing ground is equalized. So I get these notes too. When I'm leading a middle school faculty meeting for Angel Keitel, I often ask people to fill out, like 3 or 4 people in the group to fill out the observation form for me. Or when I'm facilitating an MVI-FI workshop, my team will often sit and fill out the notes for me. That's a very different dynamic. And we will observe about 30 minutes per class. And if you think about 4 people getting observed or 4 classes getting observed, that's a 2-hour commitment, right? And then we're getting together to debrief for about 45 minutes to an hour, which is not enough time, but it's what we can afford to do right now. We really borrow it from, if you think about medical rounds, right? And so many universities now that are serious about innovation, I think about UVA's medical school in particular is a great example of innovative school change right now. Learning walks and rounds in a hospital are not just for people who are in their first years of practice. They actually are extending rounds into one's entire range of practice and learning from each other, whether you're a 30-year veteran of medicine or whether you're in your 5th year practicing. But it's that common case study of real life examples that makes it such a rich exchange. A resource that I highly, highly recommend, this is actually how I started. So in 2003, I spent a series of summers at Harvard Graduate School of Education with Elizabeth City and Dick Elmore and Lee Teitel, and we watched basically, I don't know, somewhere from 8 to 20 hours of classroom practice and just practice taking clinical notes and debriefing those notes with the teacher never being there. They were all videotaped so that we could get better before we ever exposed a teacher to our note-taking and conversation. Now we try to replicate that a little bit, but fast forward it at Mount Vernon. But let me read this to you. The rounds process is an explicit practice that is designed to bring discussions of instruction directly into the process of school improvement. It's a set of protocols and processes for observing, analyzing, discussing, and understanding instruction that can be used to improve student learning at scale. The practice works because it creates a common discipline and focus among practitioners with a common purpose and set of problems. So you can imagine this network that you saw simulated meeting together for 6 to 8 weeks or an entire semester, or best case scenario, an entire year. Imagine the common language we develop. So when we say things like how we're infusing the innovator mindset in classes, we start to mean the same thing by that. When we start to see the difference in our report forms, when we share those reports and we see that somebody marked student engagement at 30%, somebody marked the same exact class of student engagement at 60%, and someone marked the same exact class at 100% student engagement, what a rich discussion that is. And then your community starts to develop over time this shared understanding of what student engagement looks like, what it sounds like, what it acts like and smells like. So that then you can start to use those phrases and know that you're meaning the same thing, which I could almost guarantee you at most schools when they talk about student engagement and you get 5 people in the room, they mean 5 very different things. So here's how we started. We didn't do all this at once overnight. It was a multi-year process. In 2013-14, we piloted it with the middle school heads of grade, and in the spring we piloted it with the lower school heads of grade. What we're essentially doing is training the trainers, right? We're creating disciples who know what to do so that they can go forth and do likewise. And then in 2014-15, the middle school was doing networks with all faculty and the lower school was doing networks with all faculty. The lab environment that creates, because you can learn by doing, so again, as a school of innovation, you're a lab. And we were learning by doing. We were learning from our mistakes. We were learning from our successes. We were iterating on the fly how to conduct the debriefs, we are on the 5th prototype of the form that we use because we learned by doing, right? But not with the whole faculty, with a smaller group at first. 15-16, we piloted with the heads of grade in the upper school. The networks in the middle school and lower school were continuing, and the preschool, the pilot was starting. And then in 16-17, we're doing a second pilot with the upper school, so you might infer from that things didn't go so well in the 15-16 year with the upper school pilot. Sometimes that happens. And we needed to repeat the pilot because we didn't have enough buy-in from the leaders in order to really cascade it to the faculty yet. So we delayed a year. And then the other networks are continuing. And now the upper school is networking on a regular basis. Just some of the steps of the IR. So we form the networks. So everyone now is involved in a network. That subset of the team observed, and a subset is observed, much like we simulated here. Notes are gathered in the SurveyMonkey and then distributed to the network like we talked about. And then the observed, Derek in our simulation case, takes notes on what he really wants to drive the discussion. So notice that he invited the feedback, right? He asked them for feedback, which is very different construct than if this network had said, here, let me tell you what I think you could have done to do better, right? The dynamic of that is hard on someone who's been in a school that hasn't had open wall practice. So Derek modeled it beautifully of inviting that feedback, which is a very different thing to have happen. Then the debrief. So I was playing the role of alpha facilitator, kicking off the debrief, setting the stage. We generally start with those 2 questions. What were you hoping to accomplish? Not from a lesson plan standpoint, but from a learning standpoint. And then what was a driving question for you that you saw from the notes that you really want to talk about? So Derek wanted to know how to get the students more engaged in that micro lecture at the beginning. We eventually get to a problem of practice. You heard me mention that, is that ideally the network develops a problem of practice that they work on together. So they all might be working on different ways of fleshing out that construct of engagement. And then that alpha facilitator really synthesizes the notes. We archive all the notes in a Google Doc. And people write down things like 3 things that they learned from that debrief, 2 questions they still have, and 1 thing that they're going to try next time in their class. And we keep running records of those things. One thing that we do, that the reason why you filled out the back of this form is this is where the pedagography comes in. So we start to map out, like if I asked you, how many times in your school is the instructional methodology of guided practice used? You could guess, but I bet you couldn't tell me exactly. I can tell you exactly. We have 8,000 observations recorded, and I can tell you how often that type of methodology is used along with 29 other methodologies. And then we can start to correlate them with placement of furniture, instructional methodology, and to what degree the mindsets are being infused, and we can gear our professional learning towards those things. Now, we're on the front edge of that. We use the debriefs primarily for network practice, not to really do a thorough mapping out of the pedagogical ecosystem, but let me hand it off to the expert who is doing it that way.
All right, thank you, Bo. So, if you hadn't already figured out, there's a Jedi Master Padawan relationship here. Different school, different culture. So Providence State School doesn't have that inquiry piece, right, built right into the mission statement. But I saw Bo and a team from Mount Vernon present in 2016 at the NAIS annual conference. And I was fascinated by the mapping the terrain of teaching and learning. And my first career, I was a U.S. Cav Scout in the Army, and I was a professional navigator, basically, right? And I was absolutely fascinated by this idea of how do we move from these anecdotal assessments of our teachers to something that's more data-driven. And I'm a science guy by background. So, and we hear it all the time, whether the kids put it out or parents put it out in carpool or even our own colleagues, right, what we suspect is going on in those rooms. So I was like, how can we really get a clearer picture? And yeah, you got to get down into the classrooms. You have to make the walls transparent. So after I saw this, I came back. I had a retreat with my 3 division heads. We literally went to the mountains, did some hiking to be inspired, and I brought back a tool similar to what is sitting at your desk. Just ripped that right off out of the conference materials, and I said, hey, could we commit to piloting this next year? A train-the-trainer model. We'll work with our grade level team leaders in the lower school. We'll work with our department chairs. They'll be our guinea pigs. What do you think? We marked it up, made our own version, and we just said, hey, we're going to go try and do this. And it's a different approach. I mean, Bo talked a lot about that IR process and that debrief. That's where I want to be. That's not where we are right now. And so we thought this would be an interesting compare and contrast. But if you look, right, here's our goals. Map teaching and learning, make classroom walls transparent, just like the quote from the book, and start to foster a coaching culture to help everyone in the system improve with more immediate feedback. So you're going to see a step in the way we do it too, where a teacher gets immediate feedback. And that's through the tools we use this, we rigged this with. Same thing. Notice this is kind of a 3-year journey for us. We just felt compelled to try something. So our pilot year, the division heads, all our department chairs and team leaders, we had them read Mindset, TK through 12. We didn't ask all faculty to do this yet. And we started really from that standpoint of everybody needs a coach. How do we have a growth mindset? How do we model that, start to encourage that in the organization? And then we started. We started small. Year 2, we had our chairs, instead of being so much the observed, become the observers and our team leaders, and that started to spread. And we set a goal that everyone in the organization was observed. Everyone, all our teachers were observed by the end of that year. They knew what the form looked like and what a learning walk was. Even if they didn't understand it, they heard the words, they saw the form. Somebody came in their room. And then this year, we're really trying to start to get more into rounds, and especially with a focus on our new teachers. We had our biggest hiring year probably ever last year, and I want to say we have about 20 new faculty across 3 divisions. And so we're trying to work with that CASTLE team, the center, to help navigate that cohort and start to do things more intentionally with that feedback focus that Bo was modeling. If you want to know our workflow, so here's a basic thing. We didn't use SurveyMonkey. We just used Google Tools. All right, this is easy. I'm telling you, you can set this up like tomorrow if you want to test it. Basically, we use a Google form that routes it to a master spreadsheet. I have a tab for each division. Okay, so my lower school director, right? My lower school head, my middle school head, my upper school, they each have their own tab. They go into that after the spreadsheet's filled, and they use an add-on called Autocrat. And basically we get this, once they run that add-on, there's an immediate push to 3 people: the observer, the observed, and the division head. So all that's built into the system, and it's immediate. So they have a form. Many of the questions I borrowed from Bo, but we have added our own, and we've also added, you'll see we've customized it to start looking at our PD Passport content, skills, and character dispositions. But basically, they make this a home button on their iPads. Walk into any classroom, open it up, go to town. It's routed to the spreadsheet. And then it's a bit of a mail merge kind of gig here. It's a little bit of a form letter, but again, back to what Bo was saying, it's customized to what was seen. We're trying not to make judgments, but in some cases, we are. Like if we start talking about engagement, we get it, there's observation and there's inference. But that is a rich conversation. So that's our flow. Again, what got me most excited is this kind of meta-analysis piece. This like, what does teaching and learning really look like, right? And we're a large, complex school. I've got 170 full-time teachers, right? How can, in a division, if I have an upper school division head who has almost 70 teachers, how can he be everywhere? He can't do it. But we can get a sense of it. So this is my 3 division heads. This is our most recent retreat. What's laying there on the table is in the conference materials. So if you click on about this presentation, you'll find that handout. It was about 8 pages. I saved some trees, former environmental science teacher, but you can find some metadata there that you can look at. You can also reach out to me. I'll send you more. But basically, when we pulled this out, and we were doing it at the semester and end of year, we restated our goals for anyone we were going to do this analysis with, and we were doing it with our team leaders and department chairs. And we started to look at things. It's a little hard to see right here, but you'll see when you open the materials, that says count by division, the number of observations. In this case, last year there were 239 observations from September to May. So we have a rich set of data points. We know across the school who we're seeing, and most often, and who we're not seeing, right? And my performing arts people are very sad. We have some work to do. And then this engagement piece, I just want to throw this out here. This is year 1. This is our pilot. This is the question we were asking, and I think it was basically Bo's question off the scale. We didn't even define it. We just put it out there. But look at that. Year 1, we're tapping ourselves on the back. We're like, wow, 90% of our classes, like engagement. When we go into classrooms, right? Wow, that's amazing, right? And then the next year we were like, well, wait a minute. We've never really defined engagement. Has anybody ever seen this scale? Okay, I don't know who Philip Slechty is, but I thought it was a neat scale. And we're like, all right, let's just, we don't even agree. All our leaders don't agree on what engagement is, but let's just throw this in the form and see what we get. And we did. And then this is what the data looked like after the second year. Okay? Now it's a different year. We're observing at different times. It's not a controlled experiment, but with more choices, we got richer data, we got a better conversation. We actually had 9 observations of ritual compliance. And 1 observation where the observer noted retreatism. Right? Like, what does that mean? What is that coaching conversation like? What a rich definition. So I think that's neat. What do you think the kids were showing in my lesson? Were they fully engaged?
Not the first part.
Not in the first part, right? Were they ritually compliant? Right? Would they sing song with me? With a little, will you? So, all this is to say, just like Bo is looking for the mindsets, the Mount Vernon mindsets, we're looking for these things from the PD Passport. We don't call them 21st century skills anymore, but we call them essential skills. But part of what we're looking for is where do we see those skills being taught with intention? Okay? Where do we see, there's a whole range of things we could look at, but you know, what you're looking at right there is a team of folks trying to do some meta-analysis, and they've pulled out that PD Passport. You can find that online if you're interested in what we mean by that. That's our TK through 12 framework, curriculum framework for graduating a global citizen. So if you go to providencestate.org, go to About, Global Ed, you can find that and pull it up. So hiking out, Bo, is this you?
So I think we're at the end of time. One last piece and encouragement to you also. We know from our work at Mount Vernon Institute for Innovation and at the center at PDS that you're more likely to do something about this if you'll do this exit ticket at least for yourself, right? Of 3 things you learned from today's session, 2 questions you still have, and then 1 action step you will take upon return to your school. That action step might be, I'm going to send a text or an email before I leave this room to so-and-so back at my school and go ahead and schedule an appointment to debrief this session with them and brainstorm. That's 1 action step, right? So it's kind of like punching your card at a yogurt store, right? When you get a frequent customer card at a yogurt store or a car wash, what always happens? They punch the two of the 12 for you so that you already kind of feel like, oh, I'm already on the path to success. So we're trying to get you to punch your card right now, right? So thanks. Y'all have a great day.